reaction.
I thought the choice, the word of being fearful of the conversation after a game that she alluded to was interesting, because oftentimes it seems, at least in the larger discourse, and not that there's not an emotional experience for Caitlin Clark, because I believe that it is, but it's the folks that are accused of doing something outside of the parameters of competition that are actually the ones that are fearful when you look at their social medias. This is what I will say. Caitlin Clark is 24. She is a shining star in the galaxy of the WNBA. But I do think as she continues to matriculate through this league, there's room for a little bit more accountability and self-awareness in terms of her role in the larger sisterhood, if she sees it that way, in the WNBA. But Malika, I agree with her 100%. It is certainly exhausting for all of us who really want to celebrate where this league is and the beautiful basketball that is being played. This larger discourse that can be very disappointing.
Yeah, and I think that we all have a responsibility in seeing where we fit in that discourse, and what we are working to do on this show is focus in right there on the game that we all love so very much.
That line right there is where the whole conversation changes, because Caitlin Clark gives one honest answer about how exhausting this discourse has become, and within seconds, the response turns into a lecture about accountability, self-awareness, and whether she understands her role in the larger sisterhood of the WNBA.
We're speaking about Caitlin Clark, and today she made it her business to pretty much say we need to worry about the black girls, the black women in the W, when the whole league been a black ran league. Like, this thing has nothing to do with race. Why do we keep trying to turn this into race? Y'all just mad because Caitlin Clark is a white woman that is getting all the love from mainstream media. And to me, I don't even think y'all wanted the love, because if y'all did, y'all wouldn't did half the stuff y'all was doing in the league for all these years. Caitlin Clark is coming in and just setting the groundwork for a change.
And this is why the reaction is so explosive. Because for a lot of fans, the frustration is not just about one panel segment, one analyst, or one quote. It is about a pattern where Caitlin Clark becomes the center of a basketball conversation, then the conversation almost immediately gets dragged away from the actual basketball. The original point was simple. Clark talked about the emotional weight of being mischaracterized. She talked about how difficult it is when a hard foul, a complaint about officiating, or a viral clip becomes something much bigger than the play itself. But instead of staying on that point, the conversation shifted into whether Clark has enough accountability for the discourse around her. That is the tension in this video. Not whether every Caitlin Clark fan is perfect, not whether every criticism of Caitlin is unfair, not whether race never exists in sports media. The real question is narrower and sharper than that. When Caitlin Clark is asked to answer for the behavior of people she does not control, while the league benefits from her attention, her ratings, her road crowds, her ticket demand, and her media gravity, is that a fair standard? Because if the standard is that every superstar must control the worst corners of their fan base, then that standard needs to apply evenly. If the standard is that every star must show awareness of how people weaponize their image, then that conversation cannot only appear when Caitlin Clark is the subject. And if the standard is that the WNBA wants to grow, then at some point, people have to admit the obvious. The growth did not happen by accident. And that is why the next clip matters. Because Monica McNutt has actually said the quiet part out loud before. She acknowledged that Caitlin Clark helped bring new people into the building. But watch how quickly that acknowledgement gets complicated.
Let's listen.
I think it's a beautiful time, and I don't think anybody that is a part of this league or has covered this league, sure, we lament kind of keeping this little thing that we love to protect it from all of the noise, right?
Right.
But in the same breath,
yeah,
the eyeballs and the visibility and the growth is better for all involved. I mean, frankly, John, like, Caitlin Clark got me here, right? You know what I mean? And
not true.
Well,
no, let me tell you this. So I am going to tell you this. The viral moment maybe brought you to some national attention. I have been loving what you do. You are such a good basketball analyst and announcer. I've been following you on the New York Knicks, you and O'Keefe. Some of my favorite moments are the two of you. O'Keefe is
Pat O'Keefe, my partner,
the play-by-play guy. I mean, you're so knowledgeable. I love basketball. I've been following the Knicks for 130 years.
Okay,
I love it.
all right, yep.
I was in the stands in Madison Square Garden.
That is the first major receipt. Caitlin Clark got me here. That is not a fan channel saying it. That is not a random comment section saying it. That is a mainstream basketball voice admitting that the viral Caitlin Clark moment helped open a national door. And honestly, that statement matters because it cuts through a lot of the noise. You can debate style. You can debate coverage balance. You can debate whether the media overcorrected too far in one direction. But you cannot honestly debate whether Caitlin Clark created a massive access point for people who were not previously locked into the WNBA every night. That does not erase the legends who built the league. It does not erase Ulja Wilson. It does not erase Breonna Stewart. It does not erase Diana Taurasi, Candace Parker, Maya Moore, Lisa Leslie, Cheryl Swoops, Sue Bird, or any of the women who carried the sport before this wave arrived. But there is a difference between honoring the foundation and pretending the current explosion has no obvious catalyst. And that is where the resentment starts to show, because Caitlin Clark's rise created a very uncomfortable media problem. The league wanted more attention, the players wanted more coverage, broadcasters wanted more viewers, sponsors wanted bigger audiences. But when the attention came through one very specific player, suddenly everybody had to decide whether they were going to embrace the engine or spend every week explaining why the engine made them uncomfortable. That is the part fans are reacting to. They are not just saying praise Caitlin every second. They are saying, stop acting like the league can cash the Caitlin Clark check and then turn around and make her responsible for every uncomfortable conversation that comes with new visibility. And the most important part is this. Clark did not need to say she was the reason people were there. Other people said it. The ratings said it. The ticket market said it. The arenas said it. The road crowd said it. Even analysts who are critical of her have acknowledged the attention. So when the conversation becomes, Caitlin needs more self-awareness, fans hear something else. They hear, the person who brought millions of new eyes into the league still has to apologize for the way those eyes arrived. But then the conversation takes another turn, because Monica did not only talk about Caitlin's draw in basketball terms, she started explaining what Caitlin represented.
Let's listen.
I think it has to show up in our storytelling, and it has to be encouraged by our families.
Yeah.
To me, right? And so covering the WNBA this past season, Caitlin Clark's rookie year, for all of the conversation that surrounded her, some which was fair and some which wasn't, the one thing that I cannot deny is the amount of little girls that were showing up to follow her. Little girls with their parents and the fervor and the energy there.
Why her?
Same thing.
Why her?
Well, I was just about to say same thing for Angel Reese when I had a chance to cover their games. But I think Caitlin represented, and again, some of this to me probably is not fair to her because it was not anything that she said or was truly based on her personality, but she was a white girl from the middle of America. And so she represented a whole lot to a lot of people, whether that is truly what she prescribed to or not. We can all say she is a dynamic basketball player and a force both on the court and the marketing sense. But I do think, same thing with folks that may have fallen in love with Angel Reese that she may or may not have agreed with everything they had to say either. We attach our fandom to these icons for all types of.
This is the emotional core of the video. The host is saying what a large section of Caitlin Clark's fan base feels every time this topic comes up. They feel like the basketball conversation gets hijacked. They feel like whenever Caitlin's popularity becomes undeniable, someone has to reframe it as a problem. They feel like her success is treated as suspicious instead of earned. Now, you do not have to agree with every phrase in that rant to understand why it connects. The audience is responding to accumulated frustration, the Olympic snub, the hard fouls, the technical foul debate, the constant arguments over whether she complains too much, the way some broadcasts talk around her impact while still using her to sell the product, the way her name becomes the ratings engine and the controversy engine at the same time. And there is a reason this keeps working as commentary content. It has a built-in conflict triangle. On one side, you have Caitlin Clark and the fans who see her as the league's growth engine. On the other side, you have media voices who believe the conversation around her has created harm, distortion, or imbalance. Then above both sides, you have the WNBA, ESPN, and league leadership trying to benefit from the attention without losing control of the narrative. That is a real story. That is not just yelling. That is why people keep clicking. Because underneath the drama is a business question the league cannot avoid. What happens when the player who brings the most attention also brings the most polarization? Do you protect her as the face of growth? Do you flatten her into just another star to keep the locker room politics calm? Do you let every panel turn into a sociology debate? Or do you finally separate the basketball product from the worst behavior of people online? That last point is critical. Online harassment is real. Players should not be abused because of basketball plays. But using that reality to make Caitlin personally answer for the internet is a dangerous standard. The internet is not a locker room. A player cannot control every account with her jersey in the profile picture, and if the WNBA allows that standard to exist, every superstar becomes permanently liable for the ugliest person who claims to support them. That is not accountability. That is a trap. And that is why the history matters, because Clark's fan base believes the league has not treated her like a normal superstar from the beginning.
Last and final.
The honest reflection, but in totality, Monica, we don't often get to hear Caitlin Clark's perspective in quite this level of honesty. And this is an important conversation to continue to have with empathy for everybody involved. So listening to that, what was your reaction?
I thought the word of being fearful of the conversation after a game that she alluded to was interesting because oftentimes it seems, at least in the larger discourse, and not that there's not an emotional experience for Caitlin Clark, because I believe that it is, but it's the folks that are accused of doing something outside of the parameters of competition that are actually the ones that are fearful when you look at their social medias. This is what I will say. Caitlin Clark is 24. She is a shining star in the galaxy of the WNBA. But I do think as she continues to matriculate through this league, there's room for a little bit more accountability and self-awareness in terms of her role in the larger sisterhood, if she sees it that way, in the WNBA. But Malika, I agree with her 100%. It is certainly exhausting for all of us who really want to celebrate where this league is and the beautiful basketball that is being played. This larger discourse that can be very disappointing.
Yeah, and I think that we all have a responsibility in seeing where we fit in that discourse, and what we are working to do on this show is focus in right there on the game that we all.
And when the host says there is no excuse and no responsibility, what he is really rejecting is selective responsibility. He is saying Caitlin Clark should not be the only person asked to answer for a messy ecosystem that everybody else participates in. That is the strongest version of his argument. Not the personal shots, not the name-calling, not the idea that every analyst who mentions race is automatically acting in bad faith. The strongest argument is that Caitlin Clark is being held to a unique standard because her popularity disrupted the league's old balance. Before Caitlin, the WNBA wanted more mainstream attention. After Caitlin, the WNBA got it, but not on its own preferred terms. That is the conflict. The attention came fast. It came loud. It came with new fans who did not know the league's history. It came with old college rivalries. It came with racial tension. It came with political interpretation. It came with men who had never watched the WNBA suddenly yelling about officiating. It came with media people who had ignored the league now acting like experts. It came with money. It came with ratings. It came with chaos. And Caitlin Clark became the face of all of it. That is not entirely fair to her, but it is the reality of superstardom. The question is whether the coverage helps her carry that reality or uses that reality against her. Because there is a difference between saying, Caitlin, you are powerful, use that power carefully, and saying, Caitlin, the environment around you is harmful, so you need to prove you are aware enough to belong here. One is leadership, the other feels like suspicion, and suspicion is what her fans are tired of. They are tired of hearing that she is great but protected, great but privileged, great but needs accountability, great but must understand sisterhood, great but her fans are dangerous, great but the attention is complicated, great but do not forget everyone else. At some point, they want the sentence to end at great. And again, that does not mean nobody else matters. It means the league has to find a way to praise its biggest star without treating praise like an act of betrayal against everyone who came before her. That is the balance the WNBA still has not mastered.
So that was Monica McNutt, man, pretty much telling us that in a larger
honest reflection, but in totality, Monica,
what do you
we
mean
don't
by
often
that? Like, why y'all always trying to turn this into a race thing? And that's what makes me mad, bro. They always try to do that, and as a brother, I'm sitting here like, I know y'all ain't finna do that, bro. I know y'all ain't finna go down that rabbit hole. And they do it every damn time, bro. Every time it's something involving Caitlin Clark, the mainstream media do not agree with, they pull the erase card. Now, shout out to the homeboy Ben Daniel, because Ben Daniel shared this on his X account. If you guys ain't subscribed, make sure y'all are subscribed to Ben Daniel. So Ben Daniel said exactly, she got you here. Show her some damn respect.
So now the choice is clear. Was Monica McNutt simply making a fair point about Caitlin Clark understanding the weight of her platform, or did she turn Caitlin's honest moment into another example of the media putting the league's baggage on one player? Because that is the split. One side hears accountability, the other side hears blame. One side hears sisterhood, the other side hears a loyalty test. One side hears necessary nuance, the other side hears another attempt to explain away the most obvious growth engine the WNBA has ever had. And maybe the truth is that everybody involved is standing too close to the fire to see the full picture. Caitlin Clark is not responsible for every fan. Monica McNutt is not wrong that the discourse affects other players. The WNBA is not wrong to want the whole league celebrated. Caitlin's fans are not wrong to demand respect for the person driving historic attention. But the media cannot keep stirring the same pot and then act shocked when it boils over. If the goal is basketball, then make it basketball. If the goal is culture, then admit it is culture. But stop pretending these segments are only about protecting the game when the framing keeps pulling Caitlin Clark into a debate much bigger than anything she said. That is why this story matters. It is not just Monica versus Caitlin. It is not just ESPN versus the fans. It is the WNBA's entire growth problem in one clip. The league finally has the attention it spent decades chasing, but now it has to decide whether it is going to build around that attention or keep arguing with the reason it arrived. So force yourself to pick a side in the comments. Was Monica right that Caitlyn needs more accountability and self-awareness? Or are fans right that the media keeps moving the burden back onto Caitlyn every time she speaks? Drop your take below, hit like if you want the real conversations without the spin, subscribe for more WNBA breakdowns, and tell me this: is Caitlyn Clark being asked to lead the league, or is she being asked to apologize for saving it?
Angel Reese during the closing of the 2026 All-Star Game. Angel Reese standing there like a frog on a log as they call for Caitlyn Clark. Of course they're going to call for Caitlyn Clark. She's the reason why they're there. Like, let's just all be for real. Why these stadiums empty, it's because Caitlyn Clark was there. And Caitlyn Clark gave them the best show she could under Cheryl Reeve. Because we cannot forget the toxic Cheryl Reeve, the one that snubbed Caitlyn Clark from being on the damn Olympic team, her and Don Staley. Did we all just forget all of that? Like, have y'all been here? Don Staley, Cheryl Reeve, the lady from Connecticut, all snubbed Caitlyn Clark for being on that Olympic team, damn near guaranteeing her a gold medal so Diana Taurasi could break some little record. And then make assault to injury. Diana Taurasi ain't even played. She rode the bench the whole damn Olympic.
Now, that is where the debate gets hot, because Monica makes a point that is more layered than the way people clip it. She says there were little girls showing up for Caitlyn Clark. She says Caitlyn represented something to a lot of people, and then she identifies Caitlyn as a white girl from the middle of America. That is not a small phrase in sports media. That phrase carries weight, and depending on who is listening, it lands completely differently. For some people, that is just analysis. They hear it as context. They hear Monica saying that athletes become symbols whether they ask for it or not, and that fans attach their own meanings to stars. That part is true. Athletes do become symbols. Michael Jordan became more than basketball. Serena Williams became more than tennis. Tiger Woods became more than golf. Angel Reese became more than rebounding and double-doubles. Caitlyn Clark became more than three-point range and assists. But for Clark's defenders, the issue is the pattern. They hear that phrase and say, why is Caitlyn's identity always treated like the real explanation for her popularity, while her game gets treated like the footnote? Why does the conversation keep circling back to what she represents instead of what she does on the floor? Because if we are being serious about basketball, Caitlyn Clark did not become a phenomenon because she stood still and got promoted. She became a phenomenon because she played a style that people immediately understood. Deep threes, fast pace, risky passes, logo range, emotion, rivalries, records, March Madness moments, a college career that already felt like a national event before she ever stepped into the WNBA. That is what gets lost when the conversation becomes only symbolic. The symbol exists, yes, but the basketball came first. The product came first. The entertainment came first. The numbers came first. People did not pack arenas just to watch an idea. They came because Caitlyn Clark could bend a game from 30 feet, because every possession had the potential to become a clip, and because she made casual fans feel like something could happen at any moment. And here is the look ahead that matters later. If media people can admit Caitlyn Clark brought them into the WNBA conversation, and if they can admit young fans were showing up specifically for her, then the final question becomes unavoidable.
What has been happening? She been in the league. Hell, look what just happened to Paige Beckers. Paige Beckers went into this thing thinking ESPN was gonna rock out with her, and they pretty much shedded more light on Caitlyn Clark. She gets mad, go to the after party, damn near take off her clothes. That's how mad she get. And that's how bad she want the attention to be on her. Angel Reese during the closing of the 2026 All-Star Game. Angel Reese standing there like a frog on a log as they call for Caitlyn Clark. Of course they're going to call for Caitlyn Clark. She's the reason why they're there. Like, let's just all be for real. Why these stadiums empty, it's because Caitlyn Clark was there. And Caitlyn Clark gave them the best show she could under Cheryl Reeve. Because we cannot forget the...
Why does the burden of the league's messy discourse keep landing on her shoulders instead of on the media ecosystem that keeps framing her this way? That is the part we are building toward. But first, you have to see how the conversation got framed after Caitlyn finally spoke for herself.
But Malika, I agree with her 100%. It is certainly exhausting for all of us who really want to celebrate where this league is and the beautiful basketball that is being played. This larger discourse that can be very disappointing.
Yeah, and I think that we all have a responsibility in seeing where we fit in that discourse, and what we are working to do on this show is focus in right there on the game that we all...
This is the segment that lit the fuse. The question gives Caitlyn some empathy, at least at first. It says we do not often hear her perspective with this level of honesty. It says the conversation should continue with empathy for everybody involved. But then the answer pivots. Monica says Caitlyn's use of the word fearful was interesting. She says the people accused of doing something outside the parameters of competition are actually the ones who are fearful when you look at their social media. Then she says Caitlyn is a shining star, but there is room for more accountability and self-awareness in terms of her role in the larger sisterhood, if she sees it that way. That is a carefully worded statement, but it is also a loaded one, because it shifts the focus from what Caitlyn experienced to what Caitlyn owes. And that is exactly why people reacted so strongly. Think about the structure. Caitlyn says this has been emotionally exhausting. Caitlyn says she is being falsely characterized. Caitlyn says she is afraid of how the conversation gets twisted after games. And the response becomes, yes, but the people accused in the discourse are scared too, and Caitlyn needs more accountability. That may be a fair point in a broader media seminar. There are players who receive ugly messages. There are players who get unfairly targeted after physical plays. There are players who have been turned into villains by viral clips. That is real, and nobody honest should deny it. But in this specific moment, fans wanted the conversation to stay on Caitlyn's actual words, because she was not saying other players deserve harassment. She was not saying she is the only person under pressure. She was not saying the entire league should revolve around her feelings. She was saying the public conversation around her gets so distorted that even normal basketball moments become character accusations. And that is exactly what happened again. Her complaint about false characterization became another conversation about what she needs to learn. That is why the word accountability hit like a spark in gasoline. Accountability for what, exactly? For being popular? For being covered? For having fans? For drawing an audience the league desperately wanted? For being the subject of arguments she did not create? If the answer is that Caitlyn needs to speak more clearly against toxic fan behavior, then say that directly and apply it to every star.
I'm telling you, my brain is like a damn me portfolio archive of receipts of all the BS that W has been doing to Caitlyn Clark. And one person that has been doing it for a mighty long time is none other than Monica McNutt. Monica McNutt has been spearheading for the last almost 3 years, these attacks on Caitlyn Clark. Completely spearheading it. He got the receipts documented because he got a lot of what's her name? Monica McNutt.
If the answer is that all media figures need to stop turning basketball into identity warfare every time the WNBA goes viral, then say that too. But if the answer is only that Caitlyn Clark needs to become more self-aware because her presence makes people uncomfortable, that is where fans are going to push back. And that pushback is exactly what the host taps into next, because he is not just reacting to Monica. He is reacting to what he sees as a full media pattern.
I thought the word of being fearful of the conversation after a game that she alluded to was interesting, because oftentimes it seems, at least in the larger discourse, and not that there's not an emotional experience for Caitlyn Clark, because I believe that it is, but it's the folks that are accused of doing something outside of the parameters of competition that are actually the ones that are fearful when you look at their social medias. This is what I will say. Caitlyn Clark is 24. She is a shining star in the galaxy of the WNBA. But I do think as she continues to matriculate through this league, there's room for a little bit more accountability and self-awareness in terms of her role in the larger sisterhood, if she sees it that way, in the WNBA. But Malika, I agree with her 100%. It is certainly exhausting for all of us who really want to celebrate where this league is and the beautiful basketball that is being played, this larger discourse that can...
This is where the Olympic wound gets reopened. Cheryl Reeve, Dawn Staley, Diana Taurasi, the 2024 Olympic roster debate. Whether you agreed with the decision or not, that moment became one of the first major signs that Caitlyn Clark's popularity was not going to be treated like a simple gift. From a pure basketball standpoint, the official defense was always that Team USA had veterans, established chemistry, and a standard for Olympic selection. That argument is not crazy. Olympic teams are not supposed to be made only for television ratings. You can make a serious basketball case that a rookie did not have to be on that roster. But from a growth standpoint, leaving Caitlyn Clark off the Olympic team was always going to look like the sport turned away its biggest new audience at the exact moment the whole country was watching women's basketball differently. That is why the debate did not die. It was not just about minutes. It was about symbolism. It was about whether the establishment wanted to welcome the new wave or make it wait outside the door. And when Cheryl Reeve later coached the all-star environment around Caitlyn, every old grievance came back. Fans remembered the Olympic debate, fans remembered old comments, fans remembered the perception that some power figures did not want Clark elevated too quickly. So when Caitlin gets limited, ignored, challenged, or framed negatively, her defenders do not see isolated moments. They see a timeline. That timeline is what the host is calling a portfolio of receipts. Again, not every receipt is equally strong. Some are facts, some are interpretations, some are emotional fan reads. But in YouTube commentary, perception matters, because perception is what drives the audience's emotional logic. And the perception is this: Caitlin Clark helped grow the WNBA faster than anyone expected, and instead of receiving uncomplicated respect, she keeps getting conditions attached to the respect. She can be praised, but not too much. She can be covered, but only with caveats. She can be a star, but she must also answer for the discourse. She can bring fans, but she must prove she belongs to the sisterhood. She can sell tickets, but she cannot be treated as bigger than the league. That is a hard needle to thread. And to be fair, Caitlin herself usually tries to thread it. She praises the league, she praises other players, she talks about the game. She avoids taking the bait.
So as you guys can see here, Monica McNutt has been feeling away about Caitlin Clark for quite some time. No excuse, no responsibility, but get on the air and says this.
But the media machine keeps putting her in the same box: phenomenon, problem, symbol, responsibility. And that is why the Paige Buckers and Angel Reese references enter the story, because the host is widening the lens from one analyst segment to a broader fight over attention.
So yeah, leave y'all thoughts down in the comments section. Let me know if y'all think Monica McNutt is Ron Clark 2.0. Till next time, man, shake the damn haters off of my...
This part is messy, but it points to something real. The WNBA is now dealing with a hierarchy of attention. Caitlin Clark is not just another good player in a league full of good players. She is the player whose presence changes the atmosphere around the event. That creates tension with everybody around her, even when those players did nothing wrong. Paige Buckers has her own fan base, her own resume, her own future. Angel Reese has her own brand, her own audience, and her own role in making the women's game more visible. Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, Aja Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, Brianna Stewart, Nafisa Collier, all of these players matter. But attention is not distributed equally just because talent exists equally across the league. That is the uncomfortable truth. Sports are not a meritocracy of coverage. They are a marketplace of attention. Sometimes the best player is the biggest draw. Sometimes the biggest draw is not the best player. Sometimes a rivalry becomes bigger than a stat sheet. Sometimes a personality becomes bigger than a ranking. Sometimes the audience chooses one player and forces the entire media ecosystem to react. Caitlin Clark is that kind of athlete. She bends the coverage, and when somebody bends coverage, everybody else feels the gravitational pull. That does not mean Paige is wrong for wanting her moment. It does not mean Angel is wrong for wanting respect. It does not mean analysts are wrong for wanting black women in the WNBA to receive proper credit. That is a legitimate concern in a league built largely by black women and sustained by players who were undercovered for years. But here is where the argument breaks. You cannot fix years of undercoverage by pretending Caitlin Clark's coverage is illegitimate. You cannot balance the ledger by resenting the person who brought more cameras into the room. You cannot say the league deserves more visibility, then attack the main reason casual viewers finally arrived. The smarter move would be to use Caitlin's spotlight as a gateway. Put her on the marquee, then introduce the audience to the rest of the league. Let fans come for the logo threes and stay for Aja's dominance, Nafisa's skill, Kelsey Mitchell's shot-making, Aaliyah Boston's interior presence, Angel Reese's rebounding, Paige's creativity, and the rivalries that make the product sticky. But that requires discipline from the media. It requires not turning every Caitlin segment into a referendum on identity. It requires not making every hard foul into a cultural trial. It requires not asking one 24-year-old guard to carry the emotional repair work for an entire league's growing pains. And now we get to the part that should bother people even more. The media says it wants to focus on basketball, but the clips that go viral are almost never just basketball. Listen to that ending. It is certainly exhausting. The larger discourse can be very disappointing. We all have a responsibility. We are working to focus on the game. That sounds clean. That sounds responsible. That sounds like the correct closing line for television. But it also exposes the contradiction. If the goal is to focus on the game, then focus on the game. Talk about Caitlin Clark's pick-and-roll reads. Talk about her pace. Talk about the way defenses blitz her 30 feet from the rim. Talk about how the Fever offense changes when she is on the floor. Talk about the turnovers, the shot selection, the assists, the late-game decision-making, the chemistry with Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston. Criticize her game if the game deserves criticism. But when the segment becomes about her role in the sisterhood, her need for self-awareness, what she represents to fans, and who is fearful in the larger discourse, that is not just basketball anymore. That is the same larger discourse the panel says it wants to escape. And this is why fans accuse mainstream shows of feeding the fire while blaming the fire. The show gets the engagement from the Caitlin Clark debate. The clips circulate because the discourse is controversial. Then the same voices say the discourse is exhausting and disappointing. That cycle is the machine. Create the heat, condemn the heat, then create another segment about why the heat is harmful. And the person stuck in the center of that machine is Caitlin Clark. If she says nothing, people define her. If she speaks honestly, people analyze whether she said enough. If she defends herself, she is told to think bigger. If she praises the league, the discourse still finds her. If she complains about officiating, it becomes a character debate. If she takes contact and responds emotionally, the conversation becomes whether she is protected. If other players are targeted online, Caitlin is asked to understand her role. That is an impossible media environment. And it is especially impossible for a player whose main job is still to play basketball games, not to act as commissioner, PR department, social media regulator, and cultural mediator all at once. Now, to be fair, there is a real counter-argument here. Monica's supporters would say she is not blaming Caitlin for everything. They would say she is asking the league's biggest star to be aware of the power she has. They would say with massive fame comes massive responsibility. They would say Caitlin does not exist in a vacuum, and the way some fans weaponize her popularity against other players is part of the story whether people like it or not. That counter-argument deserves to be heard, but it still does not answer the central question. Why is the burden so often personalized onto Caitlin instead of spread across the actual institutions with power? ESPN has power. The WNBA has power. Team PR departments have power. Broadcasters have power. League leadership has power. Social platforms have power. Players have their own voices. Fans have their own responsibility. Caitlin Clark has influence, but influence is not the same as control, and that is where the host's anger, even when it gets rough around the edges, connects with the audience. He is saying stop making the player who elevated the league into the scapegoat for the league's discomfort with elevation. The receipt argument is powerful because it gives fans a timeline. Monica McNutt is not being treated as a random analyst who made one isolated comment. The host is framing her as someone who has been skeptical of the Caitlin Clark wave for a long time. That is a classic commentary move, and it works because viewers do not experience these stories as isolated segments. They remember the old clips, they remember the old debates, they remember who said what during the college rivalry, who said what during the rookie season, who defended which player after which foul, who minimized which controversy, and who seemed eager to frame Caitlin's popularity as something other than basketball. Whether that memory is perfectly fair is another question. But it is real, and this is why media figures have to be careful. Once an audience believes you have a slant, every new comment gets filtered through that slant. If you say Caitlin is brilliant, but needs more self-awareness, they hear the second half louder than the first. If you say she is a shining star but must understand the sisterhood, they hear the condition. If you acknowledge her popularity but explain it through identity, they hear you discounting the skill. That is the trust gap. And right now, there is a huge trust gap between a large part of the Caitlin Clark audience and the mainstream WNBA conversation. The audience does not trust that Caitlin will be discussed fairly. The media does not trust that Caitlin's fanbase will engage fairly. Other players do not trust that they will be protected from the ugliest parts of the attention. The league does not seem to know how to manage any of it without looking reactive. That is the real crisis. Not one Monica McNutt clip, not one Ryan Clark comparison, not one viral rant. The real crisis is that the league's biggest growth story has become its biggest narrative battlefield. And what makes it even more complicated is that Caitlin Clark herself keeps trying not to make it personal. She does not come out and attack the league. She does not attack players. She does not attack analysts by name. She usually gives measured answers, talks about winning, talks about her teammates, and tries to move on. But the discourse refuses to move on because the ecosystem makes too much money by keeping her in conflict. That is the part fans understand instinctively. Controversy drives clicks. Television segments need tension. YouTube channels need angles. Social media needs villains and heroes. The WNBA needs attention, but also wants control. And Caitlin Clark is the rare athlete who can generate all of that with one quote. So when Monica says the conversation is exhausting, the honest answer is yes, it is. But the exhaustion is not just happening to the people criticized online. It is also happening to the player who cannot even talk about being misrepresented without being asked to carry more responsibility for the misrepresentation. And now we can finally land the actual answer the video has been building toward. The real issue is not that Monica McNutt criticized Caitlin Clark. Analysts are allowed to criticize stars. Caitlin is not above criticism. She turns the ball over. She gets emotional with officials. She has moments where she forces shots. She is still learning how to lead in a league full of grown professionals who are not there to worship her. The real issue is the type of criticism. Basketball criticism is clean. Cultural responsibility criticism is heavier. When you say a player needs accountability and self-awareness in the larger sisterhood, you are no longer just talking about reads, defense, turnovers, or shot selection. You are talking about belonging. You are talking about social responsibility. You are talking about whether she understands her place in a league with history, politics, race, labor, and resentment all wrapped together. That is why fans hear it as a coded challenge. Not because every mention of sisterhood is bad. Not because black women in the WNBA should be ignored. Not because the league's history does not matter. But because the comment appears right after Caitlin expresses emotional exhaustion, and it shifts the weight back onto her. If the WNBA wants Caitlin Clark to be an ambassador, then treat her like an ambassador. Protect her when the discourse becomes unfair. Let her speak without turning every sentence into a trial. Give her the same grace other stars receive when they are under pressure. And yes, ask her to show leadership, but do not make leadership mean accepting blame for every toxic account online. If ESPN wants to cover the league responsibly, then build segments that actually separate basketball from social media chaos. Do not bring Caitlin on screen. Frame the conversation around emotional exhaustion, then immediately make the takeaway about what she still needs to learn. That might be an interesting debate, but do not then act surprised when fans say the media keeps moving the goalposts. And if Caitlin's fans want the league to respect her, they also have to be honest about one thing. Defending Caitlin does not require tearing down every other woman in the league. That is where the discourse becomes poisonous. You can call out unfair framing without insulting players. You can defend Clark's impact without pretending other stars did nothing before her. You can say she is the biggest draw without saying everybody else is irrelevant. Because the league's growth cannot survive if every Caitlin conversation becomes a war between her fans and the rest of the WNBA. That might drive short-term clicks, but it damages the product long-term. The best version of this era is not Caitlin against the league. It is Caitlin forcing the league into a bigger room and the league being smart enough to bring everybody else into that room with her. But that requires maturity from all sides. Media has to stop framing her popularity as a problem to be explained away. Fans have to stop turning every criticism into a conspiracy. The league has to stop benefiting from her attention while acting uncomfortable with her centrality. And analysts have to understand that when they speak about Caitlin Clark, they are not speaking into a quiet studio anymore. They are speaking into the loudest fault line in women's basketball. That is why this Monica clip blew up, because it landed on top of everything else.